The term colored refers to a multiracial ethnic group in South Africa who have ancestry from various populations, including indigenous Khoisan, Bantus, Europeans, and Asians. They are primarily concentrated in the Western Cape region. During apartheid, the colored community in South Africa was used as a strategic buffer group between whites and blacks, and they were granted more rights and privileges than black South Africans. A buffer group refers to a social group that is deliberately granted certain limited rights, privileges, or concessions by a ruling power or authority, with the strategic aim of preventing unified opposition or resistance from multiple oppressed groups. It's a power move. Those in power throw the buffer group a few scraps to prevent them from aligning themselves with other marginalized groups. The goal is to prevent the marginalized groups from uniting. The buffer group gets a tiny slice more of the pie than the others, but it's still crumbs compared to what those in power are feasting on, and that's how they divide and conquer. At the end of the day, the buffer group believes they're valued by those in power, but they're not. They're just pawns. So again, colored South Africans were used as a buffer between whites and blacks. The apartheid regime promoted the ideology of separate development for each racial group. Coloreds were designated as a separate group from blacks, despite both being classified as non-white. This divide allowed the apartheid government to drive a wedge between colored and black South Africans, disrupting unified opposition against white minority rule. Coloreds were given better housing, education, and social services, compared to black Africans as part of this strategic policy of enforced segregation and preferential treatment. For example, segregated colored townships had better infrastructure and amenities than black townships like Soweto. In the Western Cape province with a large colored population, more funds were allocated to colored education, healthcare, and housing than for black Africans. Coloreds had limited rights to vote for colored-only representatives in certain elections, while blacks had no voting rights at all during apartheid. Job reservation policies also favored coloreds over blacks for certain skilled labor positions, although top jobs were still reserved for whites. However, these relative advantages were still extremely limited compared to the privileges of white South Africans under the apartheid system. So while still oppressed and discriminated against, coloreds occupied a marginal middle ground by official design, granted more rights than blacks in an attempt to sow division and undermine unified resistance against white supremacy. This buffer role was a calculated political strategy by the apartheid regime. This is why I believe a lot of black Americans are not rolling out the red carpet for Tyla. I believe this is why so many black Americans are still asking Tyla for clarification. Although things are different today, Tyla belongs to a race of people who we would call the right arm of white supremacy in America. Based on my research, colored people helped white supremacists oppress black South Africans. Please correct me if I'm wrong. She belongs to a race of people who were used to perpetuate the oppression of black South Africans, and I believe a lot of black Americans are highly offended that she is being marketed to our community. Again, our history is similar to black South Africans. Why would you market someone to this community who belongs to a group that worked against people like us? This is one of the many mistakes that Tyla's team has made. I believe people in my community feel disrespected, and that's why the racial questions persist. I don't think it's about forcing Tyla to identify as black. I think people are turned off by the fact that we are being asked to support a person who belongs to a group that benefited from the oppression of other black people. We're still fighting for our rights in this country. We fight every day. In America, one of the reasons why so many of our civil rights leaders were light-skinned and biracial or multiracial is because they tried to use them as a buffer group against black Americans, but they declined, for the most part. Instead, they aligned themselves with black Americans. That solidarity is one of the reasons why we still call them black today. That solidarity is also one of the reasons why you'll see a very light-skinned black or mixed-race person in a relationship with a dark-skinned black person. In America, black is not only a race, but it's also an ethnic group, which is why people who may be half black or even a quarter black can identify as black in this country. I also believe many black Americans believe that it's in poor taste to ask this community to elevate Tyla when we have black American artists who need our support. Again, we're still fighting white supremacy in this country. If we're going to elevate an artist, most black Americans would probably choose to elevate someone who is from this country. I don't have recent stats for the Breakfast Club's demographics, but in 2020, the show had over 8 million listeners a month, and the majority of those listeners were black. So she is indeed being marketed to the Black American community. She is collaborating with Black American artists and influencers. We are indeed being asked to boost the career of someone who would probably look down on us in her own country. I believe that's why so many Black Americans aren't feeling Tyla. I know my channel is small, and not many people will see this video, but I hope some South Africans find this video and weigh in on it. If you are a Black South African, please let me know if I have made any errors in this video about your history. Were colored people used as a buffer group to keep you guys oppressed? Did they benefit from your oppression? Do they still view you as inferior? These are things that Black Americans need to know. If you are a colored South African, please weigh in. If you are a Black American who would like to address the topics in this video, I'd like your input as well. If there are corrections that need to be made, again, list them below and I'll address them in a future video. If you're interested in more content like this and entertainment news on occasion, be sure to like this video, share it, and subscribe or follow us. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourself.